about a few years ago, I had a coffee meeting with this guy named Chris, and it wasn't a very happy meeting, right? So we were meeting, so Chris is a venture capitalist, and the point of the meeting was I was shutting down my company. So I actually wanted to apologize to him and be like, you know, hey Chris, I'm sorry I lost all your money, right? But it turned out that he was actually very upbeat. So when I broke the news to him, he said that, you know, hey, we've already factored in the risk, not a big deal. A lot of the companies that we invest in, they go belly up. So, and he was actually interested in me, and he was asking me, what are you going to do next, right? So that was a little bit of a surprise to me, and then I thought about it because I had actually burned out, you know, after running my own company for 4 years. You know, it's difficult, especially one that's on its way down, right? So what happened is I said to him, hey, I come from an engineering background. I was founder for all these years now, so I'm not really sure what I want to do, right? So he asked me, he said, hey, so are you going to do another startup? Like, you know, is this your last startup, or are you going to do more? And I said, yeah, I definitely want to do at least another startup or two. And you know, for now, I want to go to a big company and pursue a more kind of traditional career path until you know, I'm ready to roll the dice again. So he said, hey Manu, you should consider product management. So until he said that, I didn't know what product management was. So I went and looked it up that evening, and then I was actually like so intrigued, and I was like, holy cow, like this is exactly, you know, the job I want to do, right? So product management is a very interesting role, and it's one that's actually evolved in Silicon Valley, and it's a pretty new role, right? And it's actually, I would say it's not even well defined, right? So my talk today is called How to Be the Best PM You Can. So the first thing I want to tell you is when you're a product manager, you want to be the most interesting person in the room. And so why is that, right? It's because it's not even a well-defined role, right? If you think about, you know, if you go back 10 years, hardly anyone knew what a product manager was, right? And I think there are companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, you know, they, you know, started to have this role called product managers, and even when they rolled it out, a lot of the executives, and actually, without kind of naming any names, some of like the famous Silicon Valley executives were, you know, one of them was like, you know, what the hell are these people doing in my company, right? So for the longest time, you know, there are lots of people who are kind of resistant to it, right? And so if you look at any company, there's a value creation side, and then there's a value capture side. So the value creators are the, you know, the engineers, the R&D folks, and if you look at the value capture side, they're the sales and marketing folks. And I think even like the executives, they fall under the value capture umbrella, right? So, but a product manager is actually a bridge between the value creation side and the value capture side. So what I'm trying to say is you don't really know where you belong in the company. A lot of people, you know, are like, what the hell are you doing in my company? I mean, I think that that's changed, but I think that to be an effective product manager, you've got to be able to span a lot of different functions, and you know, you've got to be interesting, right? You've got to be able to tell stories. You got to engage people. You don't lead by authority, you lead by influence. So it helps a lot if you're a very interesting person. So you know, it's just kind of a fun way of saying, like, you know, hey, just, you know, do like the more interesting things. Just learn a lot, be very informed, and you know, talk to a lot of people, go visit a lot of customers, So, I mean, I think that is one of the coolest roles in the company. So, you know, if you ask me what is a product manager, there's many different ways to actually describe it or to define it, right? One way is that you're the CEO of your own product. So, you know, you're everything for that one product or product line that you're running within the company. And like I said, you don't lead by authority, you lead more by influence. But at the same time, anything that happens that affects your product in the company, like that's your domain, right? And if something is going wrong, you can't like sit down and do nothing about it. You've got to, you know, you've got to take ownership, and you've got to orchestrate all the people across all the different function areas that your product is touching, and make sure that it's going in a strategic direction that you want it to go. The other way I would describe it is a bridge. So like I said, in any company there's a value creation piece and a value capture piece, and there are very few people that actually span across these two functions or these two sort of broad divisions in a company, right? And product managers are one of the few folks in a company that actually span those roles. And you know, you've got executives also that oversee, you know, the CEO obviously oversees the value creation side and the value capture side, but even the CEO is more on the value capture side, right? So as a product manager, you've got a very unique function where it's actually spanning across both of those. The other way I would describe it, you know, the product management is an intersection of business, technology, and also user experience, right? You know, if you go back like 20 years, like even in Silicon Valley, there are lots of folks, when you said, hey, I'm a user experience expert, they were like, well, what is that, right? So, and I think that there will be more added to this. And I think in a lot of consumer-oriented companies, I think that, you know, in the future you probably see something like a product psychologist role like that, right? Because, you know, if you look at a lot of consumer companies, you got to really think about how your consumer thinks about your product, perceives your product, interacts with your product. So, you know, I think that it's more than just these three functions, but I'm just saying that, you know, this is another way for you to think about it. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, if there's something that's happening in your product and, you know, there's nobody that's assigned to that, or something is happening where there's, you know, nobody to pick it up or nobody to perform that certain task that is critical for your product to roll out, or, you know, for you to do the next release. If there's nobody to do it, guess what? You have to do it. So as a product manager, do not be shy, right? Like I've actually, you know, tested software when people are taking vacation. I've actually, you know, I've done technical support calls, and all I'm saying is just be ready to do anything, right? It could be work that you like, you don't like, but if you want to be an effective product manager, you have to be ready to roll up your sleeves and do something if there's nobody to do it. You just got to pick it up. The other thing that's interesting is you also become a little bit of a shrink, right? So, you know, I worked at companies where it's like, you know, you talk to the support organization and they're always complaining about engine. So it happened to me. So at a previous company that I was in, so I used to, you know, go to support and ask them, hey, you know, how's it going? Like, how's our product doing and all that? And they were like, oh, engineering sucks. These guys, like, they have so many bugs in the product, and you know, we get all these escalations, and it's actually an engineering problem, and you know, they're just kind of saying, like, support, you should be able to handle these. And then I go to engineering, and the engineering says, oh, the support guys, they're such morons. they're not able to understand like how something very simple works. There's no bug in the product, but all they have to do is to handhold the customer through these steps, and there's a workaround for something that's a problem, right? So it's like there's so many frictions in different departments: sales, marketing, technical support, engineering, like I mentioned to you. And guess what? You become caught in the crossfire, right? So as a PM, sometimes you have to become like a shrink. You have to be like, you have to talk to people. You have to kind of calm them down, and you have to like talk about their problems. And I think when you do that, and when you unblock some of their issues, and when you help them out with things, they kind of become more motivated, and they get behind the product a lot more. So I think that's very important, right? And especially for people who come from engineering backgrounds. Now I know that a lot of you are not from engineering backgrounds. So for some of the folks that are not from engineering backgrounds, I see that they're actually very good at this. So for those of you from engineering backgrounds, just sharpen up your people skills. Don't sit in your desk the whole day. Just walk the floor, talk to people, and that way you become a much more effective product manager. One thing I also want to mention is that what you do as a product manager depends a lot on the life cycle stage of your product, right? So what you do in a product at the very early stage is very different from, if you're maintaining a product, or let's say you're phasing out a product. They're quite different. So for those of you that are interviewing for product management jobs, and getting into companies for a product management role, it's key to ask what stage of the product it is in, right? Because you're going to end up doing something that is very different in large companies, small companies, in products that are not defined at all, as opposed to a mature product and one that is sunsetting, right? So those are very, very different. So all I'm saying is be aware of it. Just be aware. It happened to me that I got into a product management role where about a week into the role, everyone was like, "Oh, so you're that new guy, huh? Like, good luck." And then so I was like, I don't get it, like, something's up, right? And then about a month in, I found out that I was actually seen as the turnaround guy. It was a failing product, and they wanted me to rescue the product. So I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing, but I think that you want to know exactly, you got to ask the questions up front. You got to do the due diligence for your own job, right, before you start actually doing it. And I think that building a product from scratch is a lot of fun, right? So going through the entire product design experience is definitely a lot of fun. One of the things I really enjoyed is using my skills I learned at Stanford Design School and applying it to the product, or applying it in practical reality, and kind of working through that whole process, right? So it's a lot of fun, especially with new products. You learn a lot. In one of my roles at VMware, I interviewed like 100 of the world's largest enterprises, so almost every single Fortune 100 company, right? So that was a huge experience for me. Not only did we end up creating a nice product, but I think that I learned a lot from that one experience. So it's not every time that you get an opportunity to put your fingerprints on something that doesn't even exist, right? So when I went into that role, it was just a concept. Like, we didn't even have a PowerPoint. So that's a lot of fun. So one of the things I'll tell you is that in Silicon Valley, if you come from an engineering background, you definitely do have like a distinct advantage, right? Because you get more respect from the engineers, but I will tell you this, that or I shouldn't say you will get more respect. I'd say that you probably have to, there's some things that are easier for you, right? In terms of learning how the product works and understanding some of the concepts behind how things work. But at the same time, I'll tell you this, that some of the best product managers I've met in my career so far are people that come from non-engineering backgrounds, right? So I worked with a PM, and she was like an English major, and phenomenal, right? I mean, if you look at her requirements, her communication is fantastic. And you know, she was able to also interface with the customer. Of course, it helped that she was an extremely hard worker. But you know, just being able to communicate very crisply, you know, like factor in all the feedback, and then go and write requirements so that the engineers can actually go and execute it, and then have those conversations with the engineers. She was just like phenomenal at that. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to have an engineering background, right? And so bring your unique strength or your unique perspective. So I worked with another lady who was a customer success person, and she was phenomenal with people, right? So she knew everyone's like wife and husband and kids and all this. So she just was extremely friendly with the customers, and that was her strength, because she had like deep relationships with the customers that other people in the PM team didn't necessarily have, right? So she was able to leverage that. And so what I'm telling you is, know what your strengths are and bring those to the table, right? Like I said, there's no one definition of what product management is. It means many different things. And if you're really strong at something, like bring it to the table, like double down, right? So I think that's one thing I want you to be aware of. Another thing is, you know, there's always biases, right? So I think, you know, when you're an engineer, you have certain, and I was an engineer, right? So I'm telling you that, you know, I had my own biases. So one of the things I'll tell you is that we were building a product for developers, and I had my own biases because I was a developer for many years. So I assumed that things work a certain way. And when I actually talk to customers, when I actually talk to developers, you know, who are kind of doing things the new kind of DevOps cloud way, you know, things are very different, like even from just a few years ago, right? So I think that, you know, had I not been aware of that, like my own bias, I would have gone and, you know, thought about my product in a way that's actually evolved, right? So I think that whatever that bias may be, just make sure you are aware of it. That's the key. Just be aware of it. And if you got an engineering background, that's fantastic, because like I said, in Silicon Valley, that'll work greatly to your advantage. But work on your people skills. Work on things that you're not very good at, right? Like, you know, like I said, if you're an engineer, do not sit at your cubicle. Just walk around, like talk to sales, talk to marketing, you know, just visit customers as much as you can, right? So I think that those things are pretty important. And, you know, a diversity of ideas is good, right? So, I mean, you just need to welcome people from all backgrounds, and that's what makes teams stronger, right? Because at the end of the day, you have fewer blind spots when you have people from different backgrounds and you know, different ideas, right? That's what kind of makes a team much stronger. And I've seen that when I worked in cross-functional teams, that's when we came up with the best ideas. Like, you know, I'm on a few patents, and that only happened because even as an engineer, I used to work with other departments, people with different ideas. So strongly encourage that even with product management. So PM and engineering. Now this is a very special relationship, right? You've got to be tied at the hip with your engineering counterpart, right? So you know, because at the end of the day, they are executing your product, right? So I think that that's a relationship that you have to pay very close attention to, because after all, you know, you're talking to customers, and then you're kind of, you know, yeah, you talk strategy to the executives, and you know, you figure out the go-to-market with the marketing folks. But at the end of the day, who's building your product is the engineers, right? And those are some of the smartest people, right? And you got to recognize that. And sometimes, you know, like for instance, they have their own ideas, right? Like they, you know, it's actually really cool when, you know, let's say you have an idea for a product, right? You just kind of seed the idea with the engineers, and when the engineers think that it's their idea, you know, guess what? They're actually going to run with it, and you'll have much less resistance when they actually build the product out, because who doesn't like to work on their own idea, right? They're much more self-motivated. So I think that, you know, I personally like to expose my engineers to, you know, customers also. Like at VMware, we did a design partner program. So the design partner program was basically getting together a roundtable of customers. We used to meet once a month. And so we used to go around the table asking questions, asking about, you know, how things work in each of their organizations. This was an enterprise product. But at the end of the day, I found it very valuable to have my engineers in the room, or at least some of the key ones. Because guess what? Like, they're not hearing it from me. They're hearing it from the customer, right? Straight from the horse's mouth. Like, they don't want me to distill and filter every single piece of information. They want to hear it themselves, right? So encourage that. Like, it's actually a good thing, right? You know, pay attention to different personalities. I mean, this is something that you learn with experience. But as you know, in every organization you have different personalities. Everyone's different. You know, there are some people that are kind of harder to work with. You know, I'll give you an example. So once I had an engineering team in somewhere in Eastern Europe, right? And you know, it was extremely hard to work with this one guy. Let's just call him Ivan, right? So I would fly to Eastern Europe and try to meet him, like pin him down, get him into a room, and like you know, have a conversation with him. But he just would not listen. Like, he would like delay the meetings, and then when we finally got together, he would just talk the whole time, not let you speak. And he had his own ideas, his own agenda. But one of the things I found was there's another guy that Ivan kind of trusted very much, and that guy was a very reasonable guy. So if you went and talked to him, and then had him also in the meeting, and then you know, you would ask, hey Ivan, can you actually like do this for me? And then he would look at the other guy, and the other guy would be like, yes, you know, we should do it. And he'd be like, okay, let's do it. So it was just that, you know, I had to work with this other person as a proxy, and then I would actually get things done. But if I went directly to him, nothing would ever happen. So again, I mean, these are the kind of, you know, things that you'll find along the way, and you'll have your own ways to do it. I'm just kind of sharing some of my stories. Brush up with your technical aspects, right? So in Silicon Valley, you kind of lose respect very quickly if you're not technical, right? So especially with your engineers, you don't want that to happen, right? And so one of the things I would recommend is, you know, have like a buddy in engineering, right? Like go out to lunch, you know, get close to someone in engineering, because you know, you want someone who you can ask like the embarrassing questions, right? Like I used to have friends in engineering, and sometimes I'll be like, but you know, how does the product even work? You know, how do these things happen? It's very important, right? You don't want to ask that in a big meeting or something. You want like a buddy who you can bounce off these ideas, and you know, so it's important. So whether that's your engineering manager who's your counterpart, or someone within that team. The bottom line is, I'm trying to say that just make sure that you develop some close relationships in engineering, because those become very important for you. And engineers love it when they come up with the ideas. So as I mentioned to you before, it's like, if you're always like, hey, this is my idea, let's do this. Yeah, they will do it, but it's like, I think that people are happier when they come up with things. And engineers are very smart people, right? So expose them a little bit to the customers, talk to them about the customer problems, and who knows, like they maybe already have an idea that's like phenomenal, right? And something that will really improve the product, and if that strategically aligns with everything else that you're doing and you go to market, then why not, right? That could become your next feature. Or even if you had the idea, don't want to tell them, hey, I got this brilliant idea. Just, you could kind of seed it slowly, and they'll be like, oh, what about this and that? And they kind of come up. Like, what I'm saying is engage them in that ideation process, and that's very critical. And the one thing I will tell you is that if you let engineering dictate terms to you, if you let them kind of bully you and do what they want to do, you will end up with a product that you're capable of building, and you will not end up with a product necessarily what the customer wants, right? So I think that that's one thing you've got to keep in mind. Do not let engineering dictate terms to you. That's one of the biggest problems that a lot of folks I've seen in product management have. So make sure you keep a good relationship with them. Make sure that you're working well with them. If it's not working well, then kind of escalate it and figure out like how to improve that, because that's very critical. As far as customers, I think that you really want to be like a good listener, right? Talk to as many customers as possible. And sometimes, like I said, with enterprise customers, I was able to talk to like hundreds of customers. If it's a consumer product, then you got to talk to even more people. So maybe a quick show of hands, how many of you work on a enterprise product versus a consumer product? Okay, so about 30%, or I would say 25% enterprise, and the rest of you consumer products, right? So it is different. So in the consumer world, you have to actually talk to a lot more consumers, right? And I think that if you want to get like a good hold of what the actual product requirements are, it all has to be persona based. You've got to talk to as many end customers as you possibly can. And again, don't bring your own biases and agendas, right? You might think you know something, but always verify it with the customer. And I think that it's kind of like a joke, right? Like, oh, Steve Jobs knew what the customer wanted. That's not necessarily true. I mean, even if you ask people who are close to him at Apple, he actually used to spend 3 hours on the weekends in the Apple store, looking at what customers do and seeing how they behave, right? So it's not like he knew exactly what everyone wanted and he didn't care what they said. That's not true at all. I will tell you that you have to talk to customers and walk in their shoes, go and have conversations with them. You can go and have like meals with them, drinks with them. That's where good conversations happen usually. And then also I think that you want to go and spend like time where they do business, right? Like go to their, like if you're an enterprise product manager, or even a consumer, go see how they use the product, how they engage. Go sit with them in their office from the time they make their morning coffee to like when they close down. Just observe what they do and what are the different systems that they use. What do they, how is their experience? How does it look like, right? So that will let you be a lot more empathetic. So take road trips. One of the advantages, when I was at VMware, and I know it's true for also companies like Cisco, you have like a briefing center. And so customers actually come to the briefing center, they travel from outside, and they come so that they can be briefed by you. And this is like a huge luxury, right? And I don't know how many of you have that, but I'm telling you, if you work for a startup, like you're like, it's difficult to get meetings with customers, right? So you have to make sure that you grab all those opportunities. Make sure you get in front of them, make sure you hang out with them, make sure you're talking to them, developing relationships with them, because at the end of the day, that's what will make a better product. And the other thing I will say is not all customers are equal, right? So when you talk to a customer, you always have to think about, hey, is this customer going to be like an early adopter, right? Are they going to adopt my product early? Are they going to buy my product early? Are they going to be an early evangelist, right? So maybe you can find someone that's an early adopter and will be an early evangelist, right? And then when I was working at larger enterprise companies, we used to have like these annual conferences, right? So I was always thinking about, hey, can this customer get on stage with me and do a joint session? Because that's a very good way to showcase your new features, your new product. And so, it really helps to have someone who's a customer, who's a early adopter, early evangelist, good communicator, will get up on stage with you, talk about your product. There's nothing like it, right? So when you're talking to customers, like think about all those things. Like will they help you? What kind of customer are they? And so that really helps you too. But yeah, so I think you want to make sure that people who are internal champions for you within their organizations, you want to maintain like a more deeper relationship with them, right? So I was telling you about the customer roundtable that I used to do. We used to call it the design partner program. So we used to have people that we know really well, that are good communicators, that would ask hard questions, that would actually go and adopt the beta. And so if we did a beta program, we knew that these were the people. We would also iterate the product, like we would make mock-ups of the next generation product and actually go and show them that. And so we got feedback from them because we knew that they are like the power users, the customers who are actually ahead of the curve, the thought leaders. And so you've got to make sure that you build a community of those type of customers and constantly stay in touch with them. So the next theme is punch above your weight. So the first one was be the most interesting person in the room. The second one is punch above your weight. So what do I mean by that, right? I'll tell you a story about a guy that I worked with. He came from a Wall Street background, right? So the guy, it's his first product management job. He doesn't even know, what product management is. But he was extremely smart and very enterprising, right? So I kind of saw what he did. It's pretty cool, right? Like he would actually go up to the VP of engineering and he'd ask him, so what's your biggest problem? Like, what keeps you up at night? And then the guy would tell him, about his problems and about some of the issues that the company is having. And then he would go like to the VP of marketing and be like, hey, what do you think of this issue? What keeps you up at night, right? And so pretty soon he talked to all the executives and now he's like, asking them about their problems and suggesting things and, what came as a suggestion from another executive. Now some of them started thinking, hey, maybe, they thought that it was his idea that they could do some of the things that they had suggested, right? So pretty soon, like he kind of, he showed people that he was thinking very strategically at a high level, and so he was having the smart conversations. Because anytime you talk to him, you be like, hey, who you've been talking to, right? Because you know, it seems like you know what the right problems are, what you know, how the product should be going, the strategy of the company. So I think that he was punching way above his weight, right? So as someone who just joined as a product manager, all of a sudden now he's getting in front of all the executives, all the key customers, and so, you know, he was kind of like doing a really good job of it. So, and I think as a product manager, and I think in pretty much every role you got to do that, but as a product manager it's even more important. Because at the end of the day, you know, you are leading a team of people who build your product, who market your product, who sell your product. You have to lead those, you know, roadmap discussions. When customer meetings happen, you have to take charge. You have to, you know, figure out what the questions you want to ask them are. You got to figure out who's in the meeting, and you got to put it together. You have to lead engineering to build the product, right? You have to lead product launch. So when the product launches, you know, maybe you create a war room in your company, and you know, you buy pizza for everyone, for the engineers, and you know, when it goes live, like especially if it's a SaaS product or something, you know, problems will happen. You know, if it's a consumer business, you know, people will start using it, and you don't want the platform to crash, or bad things can happen, right? So, but you gotta rally them all together and make sure that they're all working as a team. And so, yeah, the product launch is one of those times when things kind of happen all of a sudden together. And so there's so many stakeholders, and you are the leader. So I think what I'm trying to say is, you know, your role might be product manager or senior product manager, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, if you want ownership of your product and you want things to happen the way you want them to happen, you've got to lead, and you've got to punch above your weight category, right? So that's what I was getting at. So another interesting thing is also think about like the decisions that you make. Like I said, you got to be very careful about you know, your biases that you bring. So I think that you know, start to obsess on products, right? So that'll make you a good product manager. Like you know, I really like cameras. I really like motorcycles. So I mean, I know like all the models, all the specs, and so, you know, it's just kind of fun. Like that's actually, those are things that I like, and when I obsess about them and think of them as a product manager, it actually helps me, you know, develop my product management skills more, right? And think about, like, you know, why is this product designed this way? What, I mean, just start to, you know, use that kind of part of your brain, like even when you interact with the products that you use, right? Like if you are buying a TV on Amazon, you know, maybe you're not the decision maker in your household, but, you know, get involved, just, you know, use your product management brain and see like how that experience is. You know, I think that once you obsess with product, you will definitely become a better product manager. And yeah, so use your product management acumen. Another thing is sharpen your decision-making ability. So these are a couple of books that help me. I don't know, you can look at them, or you can, you know, look at something else on Amazon. But basically, you know, there are many decisions that you have to make as a leader. And this applies to, you know, executives, anyone else, right? Anyone who needs to make decisions. You just want to be aware. What are my biases? Is this decision a simple decision? You know, it's interesting, these books talk about when to use your prefrontal cortex and when to use your limbic brain. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, your prefrontal cortex is actually good for when you're making decisions with very few variables. But your limbic brain is actually really good for, you know, if you're making big decisions where things involve a lot of different variables. but at the same time, it's only when you're experienced that you can rely on it. So, very interesting, right? So I think that these books have some interesting thoughts on all that. Another thing that's very critical is learn how to say no, right? So this is going to be very, very critical for you, because guess what? Every single person wants to be the product manager, right? People in support, sales, engineering, like they all want to do your job, right? They all are like, hey, we should have this in the product, and we should do this and that. And just remember that you are in charge. And like I mentioned to you before, if you are not in charge of that, if you let others kind of bully you and like push you around and have those type of decisions be made in their favor, you're not going to have a good product. You're not going to necessarily have what the customers are looking for. So, and then also remember, a lot of product management is just saying no, right? Because you have like 101 suggestions every single day, and you can only do one or two, right? So you got to say no to the majority of them. So, but there are some ways of saying no. You don't have to say like no or like, back off or whatever. You can do it in a very non-aggressive way, in a good way. So you can say that, hey, that's a great suggestion. I've actually put this in the parking lot, right? So maybe that's one way of saying it. And of course, nobody likes it when you say no without understanding what the request is. So, let's say there's like a request for a new feature. Find out like, why is this person thinking like that, or where they got this idea from, and think about it, right? Don't just say no. You got to think about it, and you got to, go through the whole decision-making process, and then get back to them and say, hey, at this time, I don't think that's possible because of X, Y, Z, or I talked to these folks and some of the executives. This is not our strategic direction. People don't like it when you just say no without any like proper reasoning to back it up. And of course, if you're willing to revisit that decision later, say it, right? Like you can be like, hey, right now, I don't think we have the bandwidth to do this because this is what we're focusing on X, Y, Z. But guess what? In 6 months from now, our engineering bandwidth opens up a little more, and then we could consider this, right? And then one more thing that really helps you is if you kind of talk about strategy to the executives and come up with a list of priorities that you're working towards, right? So that way it's very transparent. So the thing is, let's say you put it up on a wiki or an internal wiki or in a document somewhere where everyone else can see it. Then when they come up with a suggestion, you can be like, hey, look, this is our strategy, this is our priorities right now, and this does not fall under that bucket, or this does not meet those requirements. So I think that's very important, because people don't like it when when you're not sharing your process with them, and like I said, bring everyone along to the journey and make sure that everyone understands how you're working. So be very transparent. Everyone wants to be the PM. Do not let everyone be the PM. There's only one steering wheel, and you have it in your hands. Do not let other people steer. If you're sitting in a car, you're not going to let anyone else steer, right? I think I also mentioned this before, and a very critical, if you're getting into a new role especially, be aware what lifecycle stage the product is in, because these are very different types of things that you'll be doing if you're in an early stage of a product versus like a late stage or a sunsetting stage. The last thing I want to talk to you about, the theme I want to talk to you about, is think big, right? So we had be the most interesting person in the room. punch above your weight. And then also, I want you guys to think big, right? Why I say that is that, at the end of the day, you should feel heard. As a product manager, you should really feel like you're making a difference in the company, right? So sometimes as an engineer, I had, I felt like, hey, I'm not being heard enough. I'm kind of being relegated to the cubicle, and that's part of the reason why I kind of went on to broaden my horizon and do more things, and eventually start my own company, and then become a product manager, right? So as a product manager, you should feel heard. Like, if people are not listening to you in your company as a product manager, that means that something is terribly wrong, right? So either you have to do something about that. Maybe you're in the wrong company, right? It happens. It's not a big deal. So go somewhere where you feel heard, right? But what I'm saying is, as a product manager, you're definitely your opinion absolutely matters, because you are steering the product. And if it's if you're not, then start having the conversations. Talk to people in the management and make sure that it happens. And I think that PMs should be looked up to. It is, like I said, it is a confusing role sometimes, and sometimes people ask, like, well, what the hell are these people doing? And yes, you gotta have thick skin for all that, but I think that in general, people should look up to you, right? And again, if that's not happening, something is wrong, right? Maybe it's you, and you gotta kind of figure out what that is. You gotta look inside and see what's happening. Talk to folks around you, or if it's a company, maybe you're not in the right company, right? Like, you shouldn't be afraid of that. I think that you should feel like you're making a big difference where you are, and you should really feel like you're moving the needle, right? And at the end of the day, that's what a product manager is, and you gotta think big, right? Don't do something because if you say this or you can propose this, it's going to be easier with your management, or it's going to be approved easier, or you're gonna you might, some people think about their promotions and all of this, yes, within reasonable limits, but in general, I would say that do what's right for the company, what's right for the product, right? Go beyond, above and beyond. It is a big role, and so you have to think big. With that, I just want to kind of leave you with this slide. I want all of you guys to go back home and really think about this, right? How can you be more interesting in your company? How can you punch above your weight? And how can you think bigger? So, all right, thank you.